Most people still believe a quiet lie. The idea that doing more push-ups automatically transforms the entire body. More reps, more sweat, more suffering. And yet, weeks go by. Months go by. The mirror barely changes. Strength does not rise the way it should. Posture keeps collapsing forward. And body control always feels limited. The problem was never the push-up itself. The problem has always been how it is done. Now imagine realizing that it is not about quantity, not about blind intensity, not about training to failure every single day. Imagine understanding that small changes in how a simple movement is executed can impact almost the entire upper body. Chest, arms, shoulders, core, posture. Even the way the body absorbs force in everyday life. This is where most people get surprised, because the body does not respond to effort. It responds to the right stimulus. What makes this dangerous is that some push-ups really feel effective. They burn. They fatigue fast. They create the illusion that the work is done. But underneath that sensation, the body adapts in a limited way. Imbalances are reinforced. Joints take unnecessary stress. Poor movement patterns become automatic. And once that happens, progress stalls. No matter how much effort is poured in, there is another path. A path where every repetition teaches the body to generate more force, maintain stability, and move with intention. Where the core stops being a passenger and starts commanding the movement. Where shoulders work without pain. Where the chest responds better. Where the arms finally keep up. That path does not start with more training. It starts with better choices. And that is exactly what separates people who truly change their bodies from those who repeat exercises for years without results. It is not genetics. It is not luck. It is understanding which variations build long-term strength and which ones only drain energy with no return. Because there is a simple rule almost no one follows. And ignoring that rule keeps the body exactly the same, even after months of training. Throughout this video, the logic behind these push-ups will become clear. Some will look too simple. Others will look too advanced. But they all share one thing in common. They force the body to work as a system, not as disconnected parts. And when that happens, the transformation stops being cosmetic and becomes structural. If this is already hitting close to home, hit that subscribe button, because what's coming next might just change the way you train forever. Spider-Man push-up. This variation takes a familiar movement and quietly changes everything. At first glance, it looks like a regular push-up with an extra step. But the real challenge happens beneath the surface. With every repetition, the knee travels toward the elbow on the same side, forcing the body to resist rotation while still producing force against the floor. What used to be a simple push becomes a full-body control test. The most important shift here is how the core is forced to behave. Not the superficial core that only shows up in isolated exercises, but the deep stabilizing system responsible for keeping the trunk steady while the limbs move independently. When that control is missing, the body looks for shortcuts. The hips rotate. The lower back collapses. The range of motion shortens. Most people never notice this happening, but progress slows down because of it. Another underestimated benefit of this push-up is mobility. Each repetition demands more from the hips than traditional variations ever do. This creates a stronger connection between the lower body and the trunk, something that is often completely absent in standard push-up routines. Over time, the body stops behaving like separate pieces and starts moving as a single coordinated unit. Execution matters more here than almost any other variation. Speed and repetition count are distractions. The priority is keeping the hips level, the abdomen engaged, and the movement controlled from start to finish. When the tempo slows down, the nervous system learns. When the movement becomes rushed, the learning disappears and only fatigue remains. This is not the variation that builds the most visible chest or arm size, and that is exactly why it is often dismissed. Its real value is structural. A trunk that does not rotate under load, a pelvis that moves with intention, a posture that begins to correct itself without conscious effort. Without this foundation, more demanding variations lose effectiveness later on. That is why this push-up is usually skipped. It does not look impressive, but it prepares the body for everything that comes next. And the key detail most people miss is that skipping this step almost always leads to early limitations, either in strength or in joint tolerance. But there is another detail almost no one considers, and that is where mistakes begin at the next level. Push-up with scapular protraction. This variation looks almost too simple, and that is exactly why it gets ignored. The base movement is still a push-up, but there is one critical detail at the top that changes everything. Instead of relaxing when the arms extend, the hands keep pushing into the floor. The shoulder blades move apart, and a group of muscles that rarely get trained on purpose finally turn on. That small adjustment completely changes how the shoulders relate to the rib cage. Instead of relying only on chest and arms, the body learns how to stabilize the scapula under load. This is what supports real strength over time. When that foundation is missing, progress becomes unstable. Strength increases for a while, but pain, discomfort, or limited range eventually show up. Many people feel shoulder issues without understanding where they come from. Push-ups start to feel awkward. Pressing movements lose smoothness. Even overhead actions feel off. The mistake is usually not too much volume or too much intensity. In most cases, it is a lack of scapular control. This variation exists to fix that exact problem by teaching the body how to push without collapsing. The execution has to be intentional. At the top of the movement, the goal is not to shrug the shoulders toward the ears. It is the opposite. The chest moves slightly away from the floor. The shoulder blades glide forward, and the neck stays relaxed. When the head pushes forward or the shoulders rise, the purpose of the exercise disappears. Over time, this push-up starts changing posture almost automatically. Shoulders stop drifting forward. The upper back feels more organized. Pushing movements begin to feel smoother and more controlled. These changes do not show up immediately in the mirror, but they support every other strength gain that follows. Skipping this step usually leads to a predictable outcome. Strength increases, but stability does not. The body can produce force, but it cannot manage it well. Those who build this base notice that more advanced exercises feel stronger, cleaner, and safer. And that is where things start to shift. Because once this kind of stability exists, the body can finally transfer force efficiently into the arms. And that is exactly what the next variation exposes: diamond push-up. This variation completely changes how the arms participate in the movement. By bringing the hands closer together under the center of the chest, the base of support becomes smaller, and the body is forced to generate more force with less leverage. The effect is immediate. The arms take over, especially near the top of the repetition, where most people unconsciously relax and lose tension. The key difference here is full elbow extension under control. In standard push-ups, tension often fades before the arms are truly locked out with intention. The diamond push-up does not allow that shortcut. Every repetition demands strength until the very last centimeter, creating a stimulus that builds muscle density and improves true pushing capacity. Trunk control becomes non-negotiable in this variation. When the hands drift too close to the face, or too far down toward the abdomen, the body looks for compensation. Elbows flare out, wrists collapse, force leaks away. Clean execution keeps the hands aligned with the middle of the chest and the body in a straight line from head to heels, without bending or sagging. This push-up also exposes weaknesses instantly. If the core is not active, the hips drop. If the shoulders are not stable, discomfort shows up fast. That is not a flaw of the exercise. It is feedback. The diamond push-up does not let imbalances hide, and that is exactly why it is so effective when used correctly. For those who cannot yet perform the full version with quality, progression is part of the process. Elevating the hands or reducing leverage allows strength to be built without breaking the movement pattern. As control improves, progress happens quickly because the stimulus is direct and specific. With consistency, this variation builds stronger arms, a more solid lockout in pressing movements, and a better connection between the trunk and the upper limbs. This is not just about appearance, it is about mechanical efficiency, something that carries over to every other pushing exercise. And here is where everything shifts again. Once the arms learn to generate full force without compensation, the body becomes ready for a completely different demand. A demand that moves the focus away from chest and arms and places it directly on the shoulders. That is where the game starts to change. Pike push-up. This variation completely changes the logic of the movement. The body stops pushing the floor horizontally and starts working at a much steeper angle, closer to a vertical press. By lifting the hips and forming an inverted V shape, the load shifts away from the chest and moves directly into the shoulders. This creates a stimulus that traditional push-ups simply cannot provide. The main demand here lands on the front of the shoulders. Many people try to develop this area with isolated movements, never realizing that the body responds better when it has to stabilize and produce force at the same time. The Pike push-up forces exactly that. The shoulders are no longer just moving weight. They are supporting it while the core keeps the entire structure organized. Execution is what defines whether this variation works or not. The hands stay slightly wider than shoulder width, fingers firmly gripping the ground, and the hips stay genuinely elevated. This is not a regular push-up with a slight bend at the waist. The head travels down between the hands, not forward. When that alignment is lost, the stimulus fades and stress shifts into the lower back. Control during the descent is non-negotiable. Dropping quickly into the bottom position turns the exercise into a balance challenge instead of a strength builder. When the descent is slow and intentional, every repetition builds real capacity in the shoulders and reinforces joint integrity for future progress. One of the most powerful aspects of this variation is how easily it scales. Small adjustments completely change the difficulty. Elevating the hands reduces the load. Elevating the feet dramatically increases shoulder demand. This allows continuous progression without external weights, which is one of the most efficient ways to build long-term strength with bodyweight training. Over time, this push-up builds shoulders that are not only stronger, but more resilient. The joints learn to tolerate load. The muscles learn to stabilize under pressure. This is not just a visual improvement. It is a structural upgrade that supports everything that comes next. And here is the part most people overlook. Bilateral strength alone does not guarantee true control. Being strong with both arms working together does not mean each side can handle load on its own. The next variation removes that safety net entirely and exposes exactly where strength and control are still missing. Archer push-up. This is where the comfort of symmetry disappears. The archer push-up forces the body to deal with uneven load, shifting most of the weight onto one arm while the other stays extended as support. What looks like a wide push-up is actually a near unilateral strength test that exposes weaknesses immediately. The real power of this variation is not just muscular demand, but neural demand. One side of the body must now recruit far more fibers to complete the movement, because there is no equal sharing of effort. The chest, triceps, and shoulder stabilizers on the working side are pushed into a level of responsibility that standard push-ups never reach. Execution has to be honest for this variation to work. The chest must clearly travel toward the working hand. When that shift does not happen, the exercise turns into a regular wide push-up, and the benefit disappears. The extended arm acts as a guide rail, not as a secondary engine. Any attempt to push evenly with both arms defeats the purpose. This push-up also acts as a diagnostic tool. If one side is weaker, it becomes obvious instantly. The repetition slows down, control breaks, or the body twists to escape the load. That is not failure. That is information. Over time, repeated exposure reduces asymmetries and teaches the body to distribute force more intelligently. Core engagement becomes critical at this stage. Without an active trunk, the body rotates, the hips drift, and force leaks away. When the core holds the structure steady, force transfer improves, and the movement feels powerful instead of unstable. This is where all previous variations start proving their value. Volume is not the goal here. A small number of clean repetitions is more than enough to trigger adaptation. The focus stays on intent, control, and pushing the ground away with maximum precision rather than rushing through fatigue. Once this variation starts feeling solid, the body is operating at a much higher level of coordination and strength. Explosive capacity, unilateral control, and structural integrity are now in place. And that sets the stage for the most demanding variation of all, the one that tests not just muscle, but timing, control, and mindset. Mike Tyson push-up. This variation closes the cycle with a quality most people never train properly: controlled explosiveness. The goal here is not just to push the floor, but to produce force quickly, absorb it efficiently, and repeat without losing structure. That combination is what separates functional strength from strength that only looks good on the surface. The movement blends a traditional push-up pattern with a dynamic hip transition. The body lowers under control. The hips shift back as if loading a spring, and then everything drives forward and up in one coordinated action. This is not random motion. Each repetition teaches the body how to generate power from a compressed position, a skill that carries over into almost every athletic and real-world movement. One of the most important details is hand position. Performing this variation on the knuckles keeps the wrists neutral and improves force transfer through the arms. That small change reduces joint stress while increasing demand on the forearms and shoulder stabilizers, making the movement more complete and resilient over time. The most common mistake here is turning the exercise into chaos. When the descent turns into a free fall, or the explosive phase happens without core control, efficiency disappears and joint stress rises. Power must come with intention. The torso stays organized, the core stays active, and force moves through the body instead of leaking out of it. This is not a high-repetition exercise. Quality always comes first. A few well-executed repetitions train fast twitch fibers, coordination, and mental focus far more effectively than endless, sloppy volume. The objective is to stay sharp, explosive, and controlled, not exhausted. What makes this push-up especially valuable is how well it integrates everything trained before. Arms produce force. The core transfers it. The hips assist without dominating. The shoulders stabilize under speed. Nothing works alone. The body moves as a single system, When this variation becomes part of training, the progression becomes obvious. Control was built first, stability followed, unilateral strength came next, and now power sits on top of all of it. That is not accidental. That is how the human body adapts when training respects structure instead of chasing fatigue. If everything connects up to this point, one thing becomes clear. A push-up was never just a push-up. What changes the body is how each variation forces the entire system to work together. A core that stabilizes, shoulders that organize themselves, arms that produce force without compensation, a body that moves with purpose instead of habit. Most people fail because they try to skip steps. They want strength without control, volume without structure, intensity without foundation. The outcome is always the same: stagnation, discomfort, and frustration. This sequence followed the opposite logic: control first, stability second, unilateral strength next, power last. That order is not random. It is how sustainable progress is built. None of these push-ups exist in isolation. Each one corrects a common limitation that blocks long-term results. When they work together, posture improves, movement becomes cleaner, and strength shows up where it never did before. Not just in training, but in everyday actions. This is the difference between a body that looks trained and a body that actually is trained. One survives workouts, the other adapts to them. What's the one thing being changed in training after this? If this video delivered even one real insight, drop a like, hit subscribe, and keep building this together.